Yes, I did, with a friend of mine. She's the one that's pregnant.
What's wrong with that? Okay. And I don't want an allowance. I want a salary.
It's not gonna be like grammar school, that's why.
Do you ever think about those forgotten child stars? The ones who lit up our screens but tragically passed away? These kids weren't just actors. They were part of our afternoons, our sleepovers, our growing up. What really happened after the cameras stopped, and why did no one notice? If you grew up watching animated films in the late 1980s, you probably remember a little dinosaur named Ducky. Sweet, wide-eyed, and always saying, "Yep, yep, yep," she stole the hearts of every kid who heard her voice. That voice belonged to Judith Barsi. What most people never knew was that behind that adorable character was a real-life tragedy that still feels almost too painful to believe. Judith was not just a voice actress. She was a star in the making, and she never got the chance to grow up. Not really. Judith Barsi was born in 1978 in Los Angeles, California, to Hungarian immigrants who came to the United States chasing a better life. By the time she was just 5 years old, she was already doing television commercials. Not just one or two. She had dozens under her belt before she even hit kindergarten. Her smile, her energy, her ability to cry on cue, it was everything the industry wanted. Directors loved her. Casting agents praised her. Her face appeared in television ads, movies, and animated specials. She was on Growing Pains. She voiced Anne Marie in All Dogs Go to Heaven. And of course, she brought Ducky to life in The Land Before Time, which would become a cherished childhood classic. But what nobody saw was the storm brewing in her home. Her father, Judith Barsi, was a deeply abusive man, controlling, violent, and increasingly unstable. He drank heavily and threatened Judith and her mother, Maria, constantly. People noticed. Friends, neighbors, even law enforcement. But nothing happened. Maria tried to shield Judith. She took her to the police. She even rented an apartment and planned to leave. But for reasons that still haunt those who knew her, she stayed. In July of 1988, everything ended. Josef shot Judith in the head while she slept, then murdered Maria before setting the house on fire and taking his own life. Judith Barsi was 10 years old. It is one of the darkest stories in Hollywood history. A girl who had everything ahead of her, talent, warmth, success, silenced by the very person who was supposed to protect her. What makes it hurt more is how many people remember her only as a cartoon character. But Judith was real, she was loved, and she deserved to grow up. Back in the 1980s, when movie posters were plastered across every teenager's wall and Walkmans were all the rage, River Phoenix stood out. He was not just famous, he was unforgettable. There was something about him, not just his look or his acting, something that made people stop and take notice. He was vulnerable, intense, like he was already carrying the weight of the world before he even hit 20. And in a way, he was. River Phoenix was born in 1970, and by the time he turned 10, his family had already moved all across Central and South America as part of a controversial religious group. His childhood was far from normal. He did not go to school like most kids. He busked for money on the streets with his siblings. He played the guitar. He sang. And somehow, despite it all, he made it into acting. When Stand By Me came out in 1986, River was just 15, but his performance felt like it came from someone twice his age. It was that raw, that real. He followed it with roles in Running on Empty, My Own Private Idaho, and even Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade. He was not just a teen star, he was a serious actor, the kind directors dream of, the kind that made everyone believe he would be around for decades. But behind the scenes, River was struggling. The fame, the pressure, the expectations, it was too much. He started using drugs. Friends said he wanted to live a normal life, but Hollywood would not let him. The world wanted more and more, and River had less and less to give. On October 31st, 1993, everything stopped. River Phoenix collapsed outside the Viper Room, a club in Los Angeles partly owned by Johnny Depp. His younger brother, Joaquin Phoenix, made the heartbreaking emergency call. But it was too late. River died of a drug overdose on the sidewalk at just 23 years old. There is no shortage of what-ifs with River Phoenix. What if he had lived? What roles would he have taken? What impact could he have had on an entire generation of actors? But what makes his story so tragic is not just the loss of talent. It is the sense that he never really got to be a kid. He was grown before his time and gone before he had a chance to breathe. You have seen the scene. The little girl in front of the television screen whispering, "They're here." It is one of the most iconic lines in horror movie history, and it came from a child who was only 6 years old at the time. Heather O'Rourke. Blonde hair, bright eyes, a voice that could chill you and charm you at the same time. She was unforgettable on screen, and her death just a few years later is something people still cannot quite make sense of. Heather was discovered in the cafeteria of MGM Studios when she was only 5. She was not even trying to be an actor that day. She was just eating lunch with her mom and older sister. But a casting director saw her, introduced her to Steven Spielberg, and the rest was history. Spielberg cast her as Carol Ann in Poltergeist, and Heather became a household name overnight. People loved her. She had this magnetic calmness. She could act through terror without looking scared. She was in all 3 Poltergeist films, as well as television shows like Happy Days. Behind the scenes, Heather's life was typical for a working child actor. School on set, tight schedules. But she was well-liked. People said she was sweet, professional, always smiling. But in 1987, things changed. Heather started getting sick. Doctors diagnosed her with Crohn's disease, a serious condition that affects the intestines. She was given medication and went back to work. No one expected what happened next. On January 31st, 1988, Heather collapsed at home. She was rushed to the hospital. She went into cardiac arrest. Surgeons discovered that her real issue had never been Crohn's. It was a congenital bowel obstruction that had gone undetected. Heather died during emergency surgery. She was 12 years old. Her death shocked the nation. It stunned the film world. Everyone wanted to know how such a vibrant, healthy-looking child could die so suddenly. And sadly, no answer ever really felt good enough. Heather O'Rourke was one of those rare child actors who never lost her innocence. She was all heart, all light, the kind of kid who lit up a room just by walking into it, and the kind of loss you never quite get over. There was a time when almost every television set in America echoed with the words, "What you talking about, Willis?" That line, delivered by Gary Coleman, became part of pop culture. And so did he. Small in stature but massive in personality, Gary was one of the most beloved child stars of the 1980s. You did not just watch Different Strokes, you laughed with it, you lived with it. And Gary was at the center of it all. Born in 1968 with a serious kidney condition that affected his growth, Gary stood just 4 feet 8 inches tall. But that never slowed him down. In fact, it made him stand out even more. His condition required frequent medical care, including multiple dialysis treatments and surgeries. But when the cameras were rolling, he lit up. Different Strokes premiered in 1978 and ran for 8 seasons. It was about 2 African-American boys adopted by a wealthy white man in New York. And Gary, as Arnold Jackson, stole every single scene he was in. He had perfect timing. He was hilarious. And the public could not get enough of him. At one point, he was the highest-paid child actor on television, earning more than $100,000 per episode. He was everywhere: commercials, interviews, magazines. But behind the scenes, Gary's life was nothing like the one he portrayed on television. His health was a constant challenge, and so were the adults in his life. He later accused his adoptive parents and former business advisor of mishandling his earnings. When he sued them, he discovered that much of his fortune was gone. As he grew older, Hollywood stopped calling. Roles dried up. People still remembered him, but only as the little boy who said the funny line. He struggled to find his place in an industry that had once adored him. He took odd jobs. He appeared in made-for-television movies and occasional reality shows, but the spark had faded. Public appearances often showed him frustrated, angry at how the world treated him. He once said he felt like people only saw him as a punchline. Gary Coleman died in 2010 at the age of 42 from a brain hemorrhage after a fall. But for millions of people, he remains frozen in time, the wisecracking kid with the unforgettable face and voice. He gave laughter to so many. But his own life was far more complicated and far more painful than most ever knew. You might remember her as Kimberly Drummond, the sweet, stylish big sister from Different Strokes. Dana Plato had that California girl look and that easy charm that made her an instant fan favorite. She was young, talented, and on a hit television show watched by millions. But behind the sitcom smiles was a story full of loss, heartbreak, and a tragic end that came far too soon. Dana was adopted as an infant and began acting in commercials by the time she was 7. She trained in figure skating and was even considered for the U.S. Olympic team. But acting took center stage. At 14, she landed the role of Kimberly, and Different Strokes became her life. She quickly became a television icon, appearing on magazine covers and getting offers left and right. But fame came at a cost. Her mother pushed her hard. The pressure was enormous. And when she became pregnant at 18, the show let her go. That was the first real crack in the facade. After leaving the show, Dana struggled to find steady work. She took roles in low-budget films and posed for adult magazines to support herself. The public, once so captivated by her innocence, turned critical. She tried a brief comeback, even starred in a controversial video game in the 1990s, but it never quite clicked. Drugs and alcohol became part of her routine. So did run-ins with the law. In 1991, she was arrested for robbing a video store with a pellet gun. She claimed it was a cry for help. Dana made appearances on talk shows later in life, trying to explain what went wrong. She said she was trying to get clean, trying to rebuild. But something was always missing. The fame she had as a teen had vanished, and what was left behind was a woman still searching for peace. On May 8, 1999, just a day after appearing on The Howard Stern Show, Dana Plato died from an overdose of prescription drugs. The death was ruled a suicide. She was 34 years old. It is the kind of ending you wish you could rewrite. Someone who grew up in front of millions, only to disappear when she needed help the most. Dana Plato's life reminds us that being seen is not the same as being saved, and that sometimes the spotlight hides more than it reveals. If you had a locker in the early 1990s, there is a good chance it had a Jonathan Brandis poster on the inside. He was everywhere. The floppy hair, the smirk, the kind eyes. You could not go into a teen magazine aisle without seeing his face. Jonathan Brandis was not just a star. He was a phenomenon. But like so many young talents before him, his story took a heartbreaking turn. Jonathan began acting at a very young age. He started with commercials. First a shampoo ad, then dozens more. At just 6 years old, he landed a recurring role on the soap opera One Life to Live. From there, it was a fast climb. He appeared in the never-ending story 2, Ladybugs, and the 1990 adaptation of Stephen King's It. But his big break came with SeaQuest DSV, a futuristic adventure series where he played a teenage prodigy aboard a high-tech submarine. The show was a hit, and Jonathan became a household name. He was a gifted actor. He knew how to command a scene. And more than anything, fans loved him. He was invited to red carpets, talk shows, award shows. But as he grew older, the roles became fewer. Hollywood, so quick to build him up, started turning its attention elsewhere. He auditioned, he wrote scripts, he tried directing, but nothing hit the same way it had in the past. Friends said he took the rejection hard. He had pinned his hopes on a role in the Bruce Willis movie Heart's War, but much of his part was cut from the final film. He was crushed. In interviews, he spoke openly about the pain of fading out. He wanted to be taken seriously. He wanted to grow beyond his child star image, but the industry was not ready to let that happen. On November 12, 2003, Jonathan Brandis died by suicide. He was 27 years old. His death sent shockwaves through fans who had grown up with him. People who remembered renting his movies on weekends, watching him every week on television. It felt impossible to imagine someone so full of life could be gone so suddenly. Jonathan's story is a quiet tragedy, the kind that sneaks up on you. a reminder that fame is not always a cushion, and sometimes it can be the heaviest weight of all. If you ever tuned in to Everybody Loves Raymond, you remember the twins. Quiet, funny, and just the right kind of awkward. They brought a warmth to every scene they were in. Sawyer Sweeten played one half of that twin duo, alongside his real-life brother Sullivan. What most people did not know was how much of himself Sawyer brought to the role. He grew up on screen, literally. From the age of 16 months to 19 years old, Sawyer was part of a television family that felt like America's own. But what happened after the cameras stopped is something no one saw coming. Born in Brownwood, Texas, in 1995, Sawyer moved to California with his family when he was just a toddler. Along with his siblings, he was cast in Everybody Loves Raymond before he could even talk. For 9 seasons, he was Jeffrey Barone, one of Ray and Deborah's twin sons. Audiences watched him grow up in real time. His performance was quiet, but genuine. He did not overact. He did not try to steal scenes. He just showed up, delivered his lines, and made people smile. And for a while, it seemed like that might be enough. But after the show ended, things got quiet. Sawyer stepped away from acting. He went to school, spent time with family, and mostly stayed out of the public eye. He was close to his siblings, especially Sullivan, his twin. People who knew him said he was shy, thoughtful, and often anxious about being recognized. He did not want to be famous. He just wanted to be normal. But that was not always easy after growing up in front of millions. On April 23, 2015, Sawyer Sweeten died by suicide while visiting family in Texas. He was 19 years old. His family was devastated. His co-stars, including Ray Romano and Patricia Heaton, expressed their shock and grief. It did not make sense. A young man with his whole life ahead of him, seemingly surrounded by love, gone in an instant. Sawyer's story is a quiet one, not full of scandals or headlines. Just a kid who made people laugh, then slipped into the background, and then, heartbreakingly, disappeared. It is a reminder that growing up in the spotlight does not always mean growing up with support. Sometimes the silence that follows fame can be the hardest part. In the late 1990s, there was a show on the Disney Channel that every kid knew, the famous Jet Jackson, a teen actor who played a secret agent on television while juggling school and friends in real life. It was meta before meta was cool, and right at the center of it was Thompson Young. He was charming, confident, grounded in a way most young stars weren't. To many kids growing up during that time, he was a role model. But like so many stories on this list, his came to a quiet and tragic end. Lee was born in Columbia, South Carolina in 1984. He started acting in community theater when he was 10 and moved to New York to pursue it seriously. That decision paid off fast. In 1998, at just 13, he landed the lead role on the famous Jet Jackson. The show was a hit. Lee had presence. He was believable as both the action hero and the kid just trying to live a normal life. And he did it without ever seeming fake. For many young viewers, especially young black boys, Lee was the first lead they saw who looked like them. After the show ended, Lee kept working. He appeared in Friday Night Lights, Smallville, and eventually joined the cast of Rizzoli and Isles as Detective Barry Frost. He was older now, more serious, but still had that same calm presence that made people feel safe watching him. Off-screen, he was deeply thoughtful. He studied at the University of Southern California. He wrote poetry. He practiced his faith. But behind that quiet strength, he was battling something no one saw. On August 19, 2013, Thompson Young died by suicide in his Los Angeles home. He was 29 years old. No one expected it. Friends and colleagues described him as gentle, spiritual, and kind. But he had been struggling with bipolar disorder in silence. It had not been diagnosed until much later. And by then, the burden was too heavy to carry. Lee's death hit hard because it reminded people that even the brightest lights can hide the darkest pain. He was more than just a teen star. He was thoughtful, articulate, a quiet force. And his legacy still lives on through the lives he touched. For those who grew up watching him, he was not just Jet Jackson. He was hope. If you were a kid or teen in the 1990s, Now and Then was more than just a movie. It was a rite of passage. It had heart. It had pain. It had the awkwardness of growing up, all wrapped in nostalgia. And right there, stealing scenes with wide-eyed innocence and perfect comedic timing, was Aston Moore. She played young Chrissy, the sweet and slightly clueless friend with the overprotective mom. She made people laugh. She made them feel safe. And then she disappeared. Ashley was born in 1981 in Sunnyvale, California. She started acting at a young age and quickly found herself cast in television roles and made-for-television movies. But her big moment came in 1995, when Now and Then hit theaters. She was just 13 years old, but she held her own against seasoned actors. She made Chrissy funny and lovable without ever turning her into a joke. The chemistry she had with the rest of the young cast was real. You believed they were friends. You believed they had a history. But after that role, things got quiet. Ashley did a few more small roles, including appearances on Canadian television, but the buzz around her faded fast. Hollywood had a way of letting people go once they no longer fit the mold, and Ashley, like so many child actors, was left to figure out what came next. She tried to live a normal life, away from the cameras and the interviews, but it was not easy. Friends say she struggled with addiction. She battled depression. The spark that had made her so magnetic on screen was dimming, and in December of 2007, Aston Moore was found dead in Richmond, British Columbia. The cause was ruled as an accidental overdose. She was 26 years old. Her death did not make major headlines. There were no retrospectives, no specials. But for those who remembered her, really remembered her, Ashley was more than just Chrissy. She was a reminder of how fleeting fame can be, how someone can bring joy to millions, then quietly slip away without anyone noticing. Her story does not have the ending it deserved, but it is one worth remembering. Because sometimes the smallest roles leave the biggest impressions. In the late 1960s, Family Affair was one of those shows that brought families together around the television. It had charm, heart, and a cast that felt like extended relatives. At the center of it all was Anissa Jones, playing little Buffy with her signature pigtails and Mrs. Beasley doll. She had this innocent curiosity in her eyes, and a way of making you feel like everything might just be okay. But what happened to her after the lights faded is a reminder that childhood stardom can come with a very steep cost. Anissa was born in 1958 in Indiana but moved to California when she was still a toddler. She was just 8 years old when she was cast on Family Affair. The show was an instant hit, and so was she. Audiences fell in love with Buffy, sweet, thoughtful, and wiser than her years. Anissa became a national sweetheart. She was on lunchboxes, trading cards, magazine covers. The fame came fast and it came heavy, but it did not come with support. After Family Affair ended in 1971, Anissa found herself in a strange place. She was only 13, but the industry had already moved on. She tried to audition for new roles, but nothing felt right. She wanted to go back to being a normal teenager, but normal did not come easy. Without the routine of filming or the identity of being Buffy, Anissa drifted. School was difficult. Friendships changed. And without a clear future, she began to fall into a world far from the sitcom sets she once knew. By the time she was in her mid-teens, Anissa was using drugs. Not casually, not socially, heavily. On August 28, 1976, she was found dead at a friend's home in Oceanside, California. The coroner's report revealed multiple substances in her system, including cocaine, PCP, and barbiturates. She was just 18 years old. Anissa Jones is a name you might not hear very often anymore, but her story is one of the earliest and most devastating examples of what can happen when a child is pushed into stardom without a safety net. She brought joy to millions. And then she was gone. A life cut short, not by scandal or headlines, but by a slow, quiet descent that no one stopped in time. You might remember her as the blonde-haired daughter from The Patriot. Skye McCole Bartusiak played Mel Gibson's youngest child in the Revolutionary War epic, and even without many lines, she broke hearts with just her presence. The scene where she finally speaks, begging her father not to leave again, was enough to leave a lump in anyone's throat. She had that rare ability to say everything without saying much at all. And for a little while, it seemed like the world had found its next great actress. Skye was born in Houston, Texas in 1992. She started acting when she was just 6 years old, landing roles in both film and television. Aside from The Patriot, she appeared in Don't Say a Word, 24, and Law & Order Special Victims Unit. She had a maturity to her, something deep in her eyes that made her performances believable, no matter the scene. Directors praised her, audiences loved her, but like many child actors, Skye's fame flickered fast. She took a break from acting in her teenage years, hoping to return when the time felt right. She loved horses. She wrote screenplays. She directed short films. Friends said she was grounded, sweet, and full of creativity. But behind closed doors, Skye was battling something darker. In the years leading up to her death, there were signs of seizures, anxiety, and possible substance use. She had been hospitalized before, and her family had tried everything they could. On July 19, 2014, Skye McCole Bartusiak was found unresponsive in her Houston home. Attempts to revive her failed. She was just 21 years old. The cause was later ruled an accidental overdose from a combination of prescription medications, including muscle relaxants and painkillers. Her mother said Skye had been trying to manage recurring seizures and had no intention of harming herself. Her death did not dominate the news cycle. There were no tabloids chasing down theories, just grief, quiet and raw. Skye's story does not scream for attention. It whispers. A reminder that early talent does not guarantee long-term safety, that even the brightest young stars can get lost in the shadows when the world stops watching. There are some actors you remember not just because of their talent, but because there was no one else like them. Josh Ryan Evans was one of those people. Standing just 3 feet 2 inches tall due to a rare condition called achondroplasia, he brought an unforgettable presence to the screen. He was most known for his role as Timmy, the living doll on the soap opera Passions, a show that leaned heavily into the surreal. But in the middle of all the absurdity, Josh stood out. He made Timmy real, and he made people care. Born in 1982 in Hayward, California, Josh spent much of his early life in hospitals. His condition required multiple surgeries, and doctors were never optimistic about his long-term survival. But Josh beat every expectation. He started acting in the late 1990s and quickly made a name for himself. He was funny, expressive, and unafraid. He voiced characters in animation. He starred alongside Jim Carrey in How the Grinch Stole Christmas. And when Passions aired, he became a fan favorite almost overnight. Timmy was not just comic relief. He was heartfelt, loyal, and oddly wise. It was easy to forget that Josh was not just playing a doll, he was bringing genuine emotion to a role that could have easily been ridiculous. Off-screen, he was just as remarkable. Friends said he had a deep sense of empathy and a joy for life that made people feel lighter just being around him. He often said his size did not define him. His dreams did. But Josh's health was always fragile. On August 5, 2002, he died during a medical procedure related to his condition. He was just 20 years old. The episode of Passions that aired the day after his death ended with a tribute message. Fans were stunned, heartbroken. Many did not even know he had been ill. Josh Ryan Evans was more than just a child actor with a rare condition. He was someone who took what he had and gave it everything. He once said, "It is not the size of the dreamer, it is the size of the dream." And he lived that way, fully, bravely, and with heart. His time was short, but his impact was lasting. In the golden age of Disney, Bobby Driscoll was the boy every child wanted to be. He was the original voice and model for Peter Pan, carefree, adventurous, and full of wonder. But his real life became the exact opposite. Bobby started acting when he was just 5 years old. He starred in Song of the South, Treasure Island, and won a Special Academy Award for his performance in The Window. Walt Disney himself had taken a special interest in him. For a moment, Bobby was the crown jewel of the studio. He was one of the first child stars to be signed to an exclusive contract with Disney. His face practically defined what childhood looked like in post-war America. But childhood does not last forever. As Bobby got older, his appearance changed. Disney stopped calling. He was dropped by the studio at 16 and never recovered from the rejection. He tried returning to regular life, but classmates mocked him. He turned to drugs, spiraling into addiction and petty crime. Hollywood had already forgotten him. In 1968, a couple of children playing in a New York City building found a body in an abandoned apartment. It was Bobby Driscoll. He had died alone from heart failure related to drug use. No ID, no news. He was buried in an unmarked grave. It took over a year for anyone to realize who he was. Bobby Driscoll was once the boy who never wanted to grow up, and yet he was abandoned the moment he did. Danny Lloyd gave one of the most iconic performances in horror history, before he even knew what horror was. As little Danny Torrance in The Shining, he whispered red rum into our nightmares and stared blankly into a future he could not escape. But off-camera, Danny Lloyd was not haunted. He was just a child with a quiet voice and a curious mind. And when the cameras stopped rolling, he did not chase the fame. He simply went home. He was only 6 years old when Stanley Kubrick cast him. Kubrick famously shielded him from the darker parts of the film, never letting him realize just how terrifying his role was. That protection became prophetic. Because after one more acting job, Danny Lloyd left Hollywood entirely. No talk shows, no press tours, no desperate clinging to a child role, just a vanishing act that felt almost supernatural. He became a biology professor, a husband, a father. He spent decades away from the limelight, content to live in a world where no one recognized his face, only his kindness. When he finally gave an interview years later, it was not to reclaim fame, but to reflect on how grateful he was for a normal life, one where he could grow up, finish school, and become someone beyond the boy who rode a tricycle through a haunted hotel. It is easy to forget that behind every iconic child role is a real child. And sometimes, the best twist in a horror story is that the kid made it out, safe, happy, whole. Danny Lloyd disappeared, but not because he was lost, because he was found. Dewey from Malcolm in the Middle was the quietest chaos in the house, and maybe the best part of the entire show. Erik Per Sullivan played him with a kind of genius that people often overlook in child actors. He was unpredictable, offbeat, somehow both the weirdest and the most lovable member of the family. But once the show ended, something odd happened. Erik did not just take a break, he disappeared entirely. No tabloid drama, no failed comebacks, no wild interviews, just silence. After one final voice role and a small indie film, he dropped out of Hollywood and never looked back. For years, fans searched. There were fake accounts, Reddit threads, even hoaxes. People genuinely wanted to know, where did Dewey go? Unlike other former child actors, Erik did not feed the nostalgia machine. He did not show up at reunions, did not post throwbacks. He just walked away from everything, which made it all the more mysterious. People speculated that maybe he wanted a normal life. Maybe he had just outgrown the spotlight. He had always been more reserved in interviews, more thoughtful. Maybe it all just became too much. What we do know is that he enrolled in college. He stayed close to his hometown. And he left the fame behind like it was never something he needed in the first place. Still, the absence feels loud. Malcolm in the Middle is one of those shows people return to again and again, and Dewey's disappearance is the one thing no one can quite wrap their heads around. When you watch it now, you find yourself focusing on his lines more closely. You look for signs, for clues. But maybe the answer is simple. Maybe Erik Per Sullivan just wanted to live his life without the noise. Even so, it is hard not to feel a little sad about it. Not because he owes anyone anything, but because we never got to say thank you or goodbye. Robbie Rist had one of those careers that felt like a pop culture glitch. He joined the Brady Bunch at the tail end of its run, playing Cousin Oliver, the character that showed up just in time to get blamed for the show's decline. Unfair? Absolutely. But that is how fans remember him. The kid who came in with the bowl cut and big glasses, trying to inject new energy into a series already fading. He was the punchline in a joke he did not write, and somehow he stuck around anyway. His resilience got buried under the noise, but it never really cracked. Still, Robbie Rist was everywhere for a while. Guest roles on everything from Chips to The Bionic Woman. He even lent his voice to animated shows and commercials. And if you ever watched Kid Video, that weird Saturday morning mashup of cartoons and live-action music videos, you definitely heard him sing. But after that, Robbie Rist seemed to vanish. What most people missed was that he never really left. He just slipped into the background. He became a voice actor, a musician, a producer. He played Michelangelo in the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movies. Yes, that Michelangelo. You never saw his face, but his voice became part of a generation's memory. He also worked behind the scenes on independent films, played in bands, built an entire life doing what he loved, just not in front of a live studio audience. There is something strangely poetic about that. Robbie started as the kid who was too late for a beloved show. He got typecast, laughed at, written off. But instead of burning out, he transformed. He kept working, kept evolving. And yet, in the public's mind, he disappeared. Not because he failed, not because he fell apart, but because he became invisible on purpose. It is a reminder that not all vanishings are tragedies. Some are reinventions, some are escapes. And sometimes, the kid who got blamed for ending the Brady Bunch turns out to be one of the few who figured out how to survive it. Quinn Cummings was never the kind of child star who felt like a product. She was sharp, sincere, self-aware in a way that made her Oscar-nominated performance in The Goodbye Girl feel like more than just acting. It felt like truth. She was the clever kid who said what the adults were too afraid to. But even at her brightest, Quinn was already seeing through the glitter. She left acting before the industry could wear her down, before the roles dried up, before she became someone she did not recognize. Instead, she did something rare. She left on her own terms. Quinn became a writer, an entrepreneur, a commentator. Her essays cut like glass, funny, brutally honest, always thoughtful. She spoke openly about the absurdities of fame, parenting, and growing up in a world obsessed with image. Her exit was not a mystery. It was a declaration that her identity was not tied to box office numbers or red carpets, that she could be more. And she was. She built a second career from intellect and integrity, not nostalgia. In a culture that often devours its young, Quinn Cummings walked away with her voice intact. And maybe that is the most powerful kind of disappearance, the one that becomes a transformation. She is not gone. She is just somewhere better, somewhere real. Dana Plato had one of the most recognizable faces on television in the 1980s. As Kimberly Drummond on Different Strokes, she was the sweet, smart big sister, America's teenager. She was part of the perfect sitcom formula, the kind of show that glued families to the couch. And for a while, Dana lived in that spotlight like she was born for it. But behind the scenes, things were unraveling fast. The industry was not kind to young women. And for Dana, it became a trap she never really escaped. Her fall from fame was not sudden, but it was steep. After leaving the show, she struggled to find serious roles. Hollywood was quick to typecast her, then quicker to forget her. She turned to B-movies, then modeling, then nothing at all. Financial issues hit hard. Addiction followed. And by the time tabloids picked up her story again, it was already in the context of a "Where did it all go wrong?" headline. Dana tried to fight her way back. She appeared on talk shows, shared her story. She talked about being used up and thrown away by an industry that only valued her as long as she smiled. And while some people saw her vulnerability, most just mocked it. Her final years were heartbreaking. She was living in a trailer, struggling with drugs, hoping somehow that she could still make it back. But in 1999, Dana Plato died of an overdose. It was ruled suicide. She was only 34. The saddest part? Her death barely made headlines, just a short story about a former star gone too soon. But for fans who had watched her grow up on screen, it felt like a loss twice over, once when she vanished from fame, and again when she left the world entirely. Dana Plato never got her redemption arc. No big comeback, no glowing tribute. Just a legacy shaped by a system that built her up and let her fall. And in the silence she left behind, all we have is a reminder of how fame can shine so brightly it burns. In the late 1980s, Nicole Eggert was the girl on the fridge. Not literally, but you know what I mean. Every teen magazine, every talk show, every lunchroom crush. She played Jamie Powell on Charles in Charge, and even if you did not watch the show religiously, you knew who she was. Blonde, confident, always ready with a quick line or a sarcastic look, Nicole had star power, the kind that does not wait in line. She was America's teen sweetheart for a hot minute, and then, poof, she popped up here and there afterward. A few made-for-TV movies, a recurring role on Baywatch. But the shine started to fade, and so did the offers. In a matter of years, Nicole went from center stage to somewhere on the margins, still working, but not famous. Then came the reality TV years, the ones no one really wants to talk about. Weight loss shows, tabloid headlines, personal struggles broadcast with dramatic music and commercial breaks. And that is when you realize this was not just another child star who stepped away. This was someone who tried to hang on, even when the grip hurt. Nicole later opened up about what it felt like to grow up in front of the cameras, the pressure to look a certain way, the unrelenting focus on her body. She revealed financial troubles, even took up work outside the industry. She became a single mom, started over, and did it all without the kind of comeback moment Hollywood loves to sell. She never spiraled, never made the scandal headlines people rubberneck for. Instead, she did something far less cinematic. She lived. Quietly and sometimes painfully, but truthfully. And that might be the hardest part for fans, because Nicole Eggert was a presence, a vibe, a whole aesthetic for a generation of kids figuring out what cool meant. Watching her fade out felt like watching the curtain close before the final act ever played. She is still around, still living her life. But the star from Charles in Charge? That girl everyone knew? She vanished. Not because she wanted to, but because sometimes the camera turns off before you are ready. Corey Haim did not just define the 80s. He was the 80s. With his wild grin and soft vulnerability, he was the teen idol who made every awkward kid feel seen. The Lost Boys, Lucas, License to Drive, he was everywhere. And yet at the height of his fame, Corey was already crumbling. The camera loved him. The system did not. Addiction found him early. Fame made it easier to hide. The sparkle that once made him shine started to look like a warning light no one wanted to notice. He tried to get clean, again and again. But the weight of being a star before you are even fully formed, it never really leaves. His friendship with Corey Feldman became its own tragic echo. Two kids trying to survive an industry that offered no protection. Corey Haim wanted so badly to be okay. You could see it in his interviews, in the way he talked about his childhood, about how he missed being a person, not a product. In 2010, he died from complications related to pneumonia. But everyone knew that the long war with addiction had written the earlier chapters. He was just 38, a boy frozen in time, never really given the space to grow up before the world asked too much of him. Corey Haim disappeared long before he died, and that may be the saddest part of all. When Who's the Boss was in its prime, Danny Pintauro was the kid next door, literally. He played Jonathan Bauer, Angela's shy, sensitive son, and the character felt like a quiet heartbeat in a house full of bigger personalities. In a sitcom world that often demanded punchlines and catchphrases, Danny's role was different. He was thoughtful, sweet, sometimes awkward. And in that stillness, a lot of viewers saw themselves. Not every kid was the star athlete or the class clown. Some were just trying to figure it out. Off-screen, though, life was harder to figure out. Danny faded from the spotlight not long after the show ended. He did some stage acting, went to college, tried to live something like a normal life. But when you grow up on television, normal is a moving target. He came out as gay in the late 1990s, quietly, long before Hollywood was ready to handle it. There was no press tour, no big announcement, just a guy trying to be honest with himself. Years later, the headlines returned. Not for a comeback role, not for a directing credit, but because Danny revealed he had been living with HIV. He shared the news with grace, transparency, and a kind of steadiness that felt so familiar if you had watched him growing up on that little screen. It was a powerful moment, but it came and went in the way stories about former child actors often do, briefly trending, then forgotten. The hard truth is, by the time Danny told his truth, most of the world had already moved on. And yet, what sticks with you is not the drama. It is the gentleness, the courage in the quiet. That same soft presence he brought to Who's the Boss, a presence that made the show more human, more relatable, is still part of who he is today. He might not have headlines anymore, no red carpets, no sitcom revivals, but he matters. And maybe that is what disappearing without a trace really means. Not that you are gone, but that people stopped looking. Jake Lloyd's story is not just mysterious, it is tragic. You might remember him as the boy who played young Anakin Skywalker in Star Wars, The Phantom Menace. For a lot of kids in 1999, that was a dream come true. Star Wars was back. Lightsabers were cool again. And here was a child actor who became the face of one of the biggest movie franchises in history. But then he disappeared. And not just from film, from everything. It is easy to forget just how intense the backlash was to Phantom Menace. Critics were brutal. Star Wars fans were worse. And they did not just take their anger out on the plot or the pacing. They took it out on Jake. Imagine being only 10 years old and the entire internet is calling your performance annoying. That kind of attention breaks people. And Jake? He never recovered from it. He retired from acting just a few years later. Most of his early interviews show a kid who was clearly uncomfortable with fame. He said acting made his life a living hell. He was bullied in school. He was harassed in public. No child deserves that, especially not for doing what adults told him to do on set. Jake was not just a young actor. He was a kid who loved building things, drawing, and dreaming about space. Fame took those quiet joys away from him long before he had the words to understand why. We did not just criticize a performance, we dismantled a childhood. Years later, headlines returned, but for all the wrong reasons. Jake had been arrested, diagnosed with schizophrenia. His family released a public statement asking for privacy and explaining that he was receiving help. It was not just a case of a teen star walking away. It was a life unraveling under the weight of expectations no child should have carried. What hurts most is knowing how different this story could have been. If critics had been kinder, if fans had been more understanding, if the system had protected the kids it made famous. Jake Lloyd disappeared without saying goodbye because there was never space for him to say anything at all. We were too busy tearing him down, and when he vanished, the silence just felt like another chapter in a story we helped ruin. Lisa Jakub was the girl you could believe in. The rebellious daughter in Mrs. Doubtfire, the panicked teen in Independence Day. She had a rare kind of authenticity that made every character feel personal. She was never the loudest in the room. She was the realest. But sometimes the realest ones are the first to realize that something is wrong. Lisa's exit from Hollywood was not a scandal. It was a quiet refusal, a soft rebellion, a truth spoken out loud. By age 14, she was told she could not return to her school because filming conflicted with attendance. Robin Williams even wrote a letter to try to help her stay. But the message was clear. Being an actor meant choosing performance over personhood. Lisa never forgot that. The dissonance between who she was and who she was paid to be grew louder with every role. Eventually, she chose to leave. She moved away from the industry toward a life that made more sense. Writing, advocating, healing. Like Mara Wilson, Lisa began to speak openly about anxiety, trauma, and the quiet devastation of child fame. Her memoir, You Look Like That Girl, does not glamorize the past. It reclaims it. It turns a fading spotlight into a candle, gentle, true, and still burning. We remember her face from film, but it is her voice in print that lingers longer now. And maybe that is the story beneath the story, that sometimes disappearing is not vanishing. It is transforming. It is taking your own name back. Aston Moore was unforgettable, but the world somehow forgot her anyway. You may remember her best as young Chrissy in Now and Then, a film that became something sacred for a whole generation of girls. That movie was everything. Summer nostalgia, growing pains, friendship, and feeling understood for the first time. Ashley stood out even in a cast full of future A-listers. Her comic timing was natural, her expressions effortless. She made awkwardness feel sweet and made every scene she was in feel warmer. But not long after the film's release, she simply disappeared. There were no major scandals, no splashy headlines, just silence. She did a few guest roles, a television movie here and there, and then gone. While her co-stars rose through the ranks of Hollywood, Ashley's name slipped out of the credits and out of memory, except for those who remembered and missed her. The truth came years later, in the worst possible way. In 2007, Aston Moore passed away at only 26 years old. The cause was an accidental drug overdose. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. The disappearance, the distance, the silence. Behind it all was a young woman who had struggled deeply after childhood fame faded. There is something especially haunting about child stars who leave no final message. It is not just about career. It is about how easily people can slip through the cracks when the cameras stop rolling. Ashley never got a second act. She never got to grow into a new version of herself on screen. And yet her performance in Now and Then still lives in people's hearts. Sometimes when you rewatch that film and you see her smile or crack a joke, there is a strange ache you feel in your chest, like you are watching someone frozen in time, someone who made an impact and then vanished. No goodbye, no send-off, just a quiet exit from a loud world. There was a time when the name Tina Yothers popped into your living room every week without fail. She played Jennifer Keaton on Family Ties, the youngest sibling, sharp-tongued, slightly sarcastic, and weirdly wise for her age. She was the grounded one in a house full of strong personalities. And let us be honest, standing out next to Michael J. Fox was no easy job, but somehow she held her own. Week after week, America watched her grow up in real time, right there on the family couch. But what happens when the couch is gone? When the lights dim, the scripts stop coming, and the world moves on? Tina finished out the series and disappeared. Not in a way that screams scandal or heartbreak, but in a way that feels more like slipping out the back door unnoticed. One day, she was a household name, and the next, you would have to Google her just to remember what show she was on. It was quiet. Almost too quiet. Part of the reason? Hollywood had no idea what to do with her once she stopped being the kid. She tried music, a rock band actually. Blonde hair, leather jackets, the whole vibe. But the industry never gave her the same spotlight she had as Jennifer. And unlike some of her co-stars, she did not chase roles just for the sake of staying seen. She also chose something that feels almost radical in the world of child stars: privacy. She focused on family. She stayed out of trouble. She lived a life most former celebrities would kill for, one with peace and no tabloid drama. And that, somehow, made her vanish even more. You do not realize how much someone meant to a show until you try watching it without them. Tina was the glue in Family Ties. She was the reminder that being the kid did not mean being forgettable. And even if the world forgot her for a while, that little spark she brought into every scene still lingers. It is not just nostalgia. It is recognition. Jennifer Keaton might not have gotten the spin-off. Tina Yothers might not have gotten the comeback. But she gave us something better, realness in a world of scripts. Jimmy McNichol was not just a teen idol. He was the teen idol of the late 1970s. He had the hair, the smile, the voice, and the kind of effortless charisma that made girls scream and casting directors scramble. He starred in films, television, and even had a short-lived music career with his sister Christy. But just when it seemed like he was destined to become a permanent fixture in pop culture, Jimmy did something nobody expected. He walked away. By the early 1990s, Jimmy had stepped back from acting completely. Not because the roles stopped coming, not because of scandal, but because he wanted something deeper than fame could offer. He turned to environmental advocacy and real estate, dedicating his life to causes that had nothing to do with cameras or red carpets. It was not a retreat, it was a rebirth. You have to understand what that means. To walk away at the height of popularity, to say no to the world's applause and yes to your own quiet purpose. Jimmy could have tried to stay in the spotlight forever. He could have milked his fame into middle age. Instead, he chose a life rooted in service, sustainability, and simplicity. Today, he lives peacefully, far from the noise of the industry that once adored him. He still speaks occasionally about his past, but never with bitterness, just gratitude. And maybe that is the lesson here, that some disappearances are not a fall. They are a return to solid ground. Taran Noah Smith was the youngest of the Taylor boys on Home Improvement. He was the wide-eyed, goofy one, always asking weird questions, always getting in trouble, but in the best possible way. He was not just a background character, he had a presence, a kind of innocent honesty that made him feel like everyone's little brother. But once the series wrapped, Taran vanished. Not a pause, not a break, a full stop. What made his disappearance stand out was how intentional it seemed. He was just 16 when Home Improvement ended, and he made it very clear he was done. He wanted nothing to do with Hollywood. No spin-offs, no sequels. He did not even want to act again. Instead, Taran went in a completely different direction. He started a vegan food business, bought a house, tried to live quietly. But the press kept coming. People were obsessed with his choices. He had gotten married to someone 16 years older than him. He was investing in offbeat business ideas. And all the while, he was still just a teenager trying to figure it all out. There were legal battles with his parents over money he earned as a child actor. There were stories about him rejecting the Hollywood lifestyle. But Taran kept doing things his way, even when it did not make sense to the people watching from the outside. Today, he lives almost entirely off the grid. Occasionally, he pops up in an interview or news piece. But he is not chasing the spotlight. He is not nostalgic about the show. He does not miss the fame. And maybe that is what makes his story so rare. He walked away before the machine could chew him up. Before the headlines, before the downfall, he disappeared while things were still good, on his terms. When you rewatch Home Improvement, it is hard not to smile when you see him. That kid, so full of life and timing. And then you wonder what it must feel like to have had that much attention, and to choose a life where no one knows your name. Lisa Whelchel was the kind of 80s icon who made it all look effortless. She played Blair Warner on The Facts of Life, the rich girl with the perfect hair, the sharp tongue, and a soft side that peeked through just enough to make you root for her. Blair was more than a character. She was a blueprint. Every show that came after with a glamorous, overconfident teen owes a little something to Lisa Whelchel. She was everywhere for a while. Talk shows, awards specials, sitcom guest spots. She had the smile, the charisma, the look. But then she disappeared. And not in the usual child star way. There were no arrests, no breakdowns, no bitter interviews. Lisa just walked away. What most people did not realize is that she had already made her choice. She turned down more acting work. She refused a role on Friends. She left Hollywood at the height of her fame to focus on faith, family, and privacy. In the middle of all that glamour, she took a step most stars would not even consider. She left the spotlight because she wanted to. She became a Christian author, a public speaker, a homeschooling mom. For years, her life was more about church retreats and parenting workshops than red carpets. And she was fine with that. She built a whole new identity outside the industry that made her famous. But that choice came with a trade-off. For viewers, it felt like losing someone familiar. Blair Warner had been part of the weekly routine, like a sarcastic older sister who taught you life's tougher lessons. And when Lisa Whelchel vanished, it was like a light went out in the room. She made a brief return on Survivor in the early 2010s, surprising everyone with her resilience and vulnerability. For a moment, it felt like a comeback, but even that felt like a visit, not a return. Lisa Whelchel did not fall from fame. She stepped off it gently and deliberately, and in doing so, she became one of the rare child stars who did not get swallowed by it. Still, you cannot help but miss the way she used to light up the screen. Give this video a like to keep their memory alive, and subscribe so we can keep telling the stories time almost forgot.